Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Interview. Today, I'm joined by Zach Teutsch, who is the founder of Values Added Financial, which is a financial advising firm for progressive and leftist investors. And he's also a self-described socialist financial advisor. It was a really excellent opportunity to have a conversation about something that I've wanted to for a long time, which is the fact that leftists like you and I tend to view capital markets with a great degree of apprehension, and how to reconcile the fact that we as leftists also need some semblance of financial security over our lifetime. So we had a really interesting chat about this, and midway through the conversation, we get into this philosophical subject a little bit about how to not lose your leftist roots when you start participating in investing or in capital markets. And I think it was probably one of the most beautiful and poignant pieces of this podcast that I've recorded. So I'm really excited to be able to present that to you guys. And so from the bottom of my heart, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. And I also want you to know if that you're one of the dozens of leftists that has DM'd me before asking about how to get involved in the stock market, I hope that this is a good jumping point for you. So without further ado, this is the interview with Zach Teutsch. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Interview. Today I am joined here by Zach Teutsch, who is a self-proclaimed socialist financial advisor. So Zach, do you want to give a quick introduction about yourself? Maybe talk about a little bit about what it means to be a socialist financial advisor, and maybe also about a couple of projects that you're working on outside of just financial advising.
Thanks so much for having me here on The Interview, Sid. I'd love to. So I started my career working in the US labor movement for a big union, the Service Employees International Union. And we had a really complicated problem. The problem was the pensions that our members were in were worth $1.5 trillion, and they needed to pay out the allotted amount every month. So they needed to have growth in their investments to be able to sustainably pay the pension. But also, we didn't want that money working towards ending unionization and making jobs bad jobs and offshoring work, because ultimately that would create real problems for the next generation of members of the union. And that's a really tricky and interesting balance. And I think when you're working at the scale of institutional finance, that really can be a problem. But it's not necessarily a problem the same way for individuals. So now, many years later, after having led the Investor Education for Working Families project and working at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I'm in private practice, and I work with individuals and families who are struggling with questions about what role do they want money to have in their life? How can they use it in a way that's consistent with their values? How do they balance investment choices with giving money away choices? How do they make sure they have enough? What are ways that are appropriate to invest or inappropriate to invest? So that's my work. I do it with an amazing team of other advisors at Values Added Financial. And when I'm not working, I'm very involved in policy and politics. So I led a campaign for a really transformative politician in DC named Janice Lewis George, who was one of the leaders who helped along with some really impressive colleagues, get through a tax on people in DC. 90% of the tax raise is on people who make more than $1 million US a year. And it's going to pay for housing vouchers mostly. And those housing vouchers will be able to reduce homelessness in our city by 2/3. So, that's the kind of thing I do when I'm not working, because I think generating that kind of change. In this case, it's about $150 million worth of social safety net spending a year. That's way higher justice, equity, equitability return than I could possibly get by taking on a couple of pro bono clients here or there.
Mm-hmm. So it's you basically kind of inculcate your leftist thought into both what you do in your professional life and also what you do in your kind of policy and political life, which is super cool. So the kind of way that we were introduced was from a tweet I made, I think months ago. when I was basically encouraging people on the left to get into some sort of investing so they can save some money for the future. And this raised a lot of controversy. But I think this is an important conversation to have. And I think, I'm really excited to have this with you because you're specifically, you do work in that realm. So, I mean, before we even get started into that and how, people on the left should feel ethically about this, like how would you explain the stock market to someone on the left that is just kind of approaching this concept of investing for the long term?
Yeah, great question, Sid. To me, the way I would explain it is, hey, look, we don't necessarily think capitalism is good. In fact, most socialists don't like capitalism, right? We live in a system which creates all sorts of problems. It creates externalities. It is slowly cooking the planet. It is exacerbating racism. It is exacerbating sexism. It is bad news. And we want to get to a well-regulated system that's more just and a world where we come together through collective action to make everybody's life a better life. Like, we believe in that. The problem is we live in that system, and it brings up a really hard set of moral questions, which is, if you live in an unethical system which is not imminently changing, how do you live your life? And you should work to change the system. And I'm not sure you should be naive about how it works necessarily, because if we unilaterally disarm, that only is really going to hurt us, and I don't think it's necessarily a moral requirement that people on the left retire in poverty and struggle to pay their rent or afford to eat. Like, of course we don't believe that thing. As leftists, we believe that everybody is entitled to a dignified life and a comfortable life. And we want to figure out how to make that possible and make that more shared. So that's why I think the best thing to do is to think about it in terms of harm reduction. How can we get to a good and fair and reasonable outcome in our own lives, but how can we do that in a way that's integrated and serious? And when there are opportunities to use our engagement in capital markets to make the world better, how do we seize those things? And how do we work with people to create shared outcomes? Because, let me give you an example. A lot of clients who come to me say, I really feel that climate change is bad, so I don't want to be invested in oil companies, and I feel that the military industrial complex is super problematic, so I don't want to be invested in weapons. And we say, great, no problem. We'll make that happen with you. And we also say, if everybody who is concerned about climate change divested from oil, who's making the decisions at oil companies? The people who own them are the people who are least concerned about climate change. And that's a bizarre and perverse and unintended outcome that I'm not sure we want either. So where does that leave us? In the United States, there's traditional socially responsible investment where you just don't invest in stuff that's bad. And I think of that as a spiritual decision, because whether or not I personally invest in Exxon or I don't isn't really going to affect what Exxon does. It's not going to affect how much oil is in the ground, but it does affect me and my life and my relationship with investments. So it is meaningful. It's just not necessarily changing the world. So I don't think it's an unreasonable thing to do. In fact, a lot of people do it. A lot of my clients do it, and it brings a lot of meaning to a lot of people. So that's one strategy. It can be very effective from a personal, spiritual standpoint, moral or sort of ideological standpoint. Another approach is to just buy a normal basket of investments via an index fund that's more activist. So one example that we've done 4 rounds of due diligence on in the United States and we like a lot is an entity. I should also say, I'm not going to offer any investment advice here, because you need to know somebody really well in their personal capacity to give investment advice. What I'm going to do is just share some general information and ideas about investing. So Oh, so I was going to say a ticker. The reason I said that is because anytime you say the ticker symbol of an investment, somebody might think, oh, Zach's saying I should definitely 100% buy this investment. And I'm totally not saying that. I'm saying this is something interesting you might consider.
This is not financial advice.
Right. So the ticker I was going to mention is called VOTE, vote, and it does something really cool. It just invests in normal, boring, big companies without any moral filters or anything like that. But then it takes those positions and it uses them to vote in favor of good progressive things. Mm-hmm. And they sometimes start proxy campaigns. So they went to Exxon and they put up 3 members for the board of directors at Exxon who were saying, Exxon's got to start taking climate risk seriously, and it's time to start pivoting the company towards sustainable investment in renewable energy. And a crazy thing happened. They won. And they were able to elect these 3 directors. And now Exxon's got some people on the board who are trying to help it pivot to being a sustainable energy company, which is wild. So that's VOTE. Then what we do with our clients is they tell us about things that are important to them to be invested in or not invested in. And then, we run it through some algorithms and we figure out how to create a tailored portfolio that makes sense for them. And then there's a third strategy, which is saying, I don't want to be involved in capital markets at all. I think they're evil. I think they're problematic. And we have some clients who are engaged in that. For us, it's not usually literally all their investments. It's usually a portion. But that gets into a field that some people call transformative investment, other people call impact investment. But one of the challenges with the terminology is no one really agrees on what impact investment means, and no one really agrees on what exactly transformative investment is. And everybody has a slightly different definition. But the idea, I think, big picture is it's avoiding capital markets and investing in a way that you think can make a positive difference in the world. And there's some cool ways to do that too.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the conversations I had with, I think his name is Matthew Kropp, fantastic guy, was, okay, if you feel just incredibly uneasy about participating in capital markets at all, he was talking about, okay, maybe there's kind of indexes you could buy into cooperatives themselves that are, more worker owned. Example I was given was not in American markets, obviously, but like Mondragon in like Spain or something, but things that are not the traditionally owned capitalist firm. But it's also nice to hear about this vote thing, because it's something I hadn't heard of before, to see that we can kind of gobble up a little bit of shares in a particular firm and then use the kind of voting power to affect kind of change. And so a lot of the conversations that I had in the wake of the tweet that I posted was a lot of leftists that were coming to me saying, hey, like, how do I kind of square that unease that I have of like, just, inherently as a leftist, you view people who own capital goods in a kind of a negative light, but going from that to someone that is going to end up owning at least like a fraction of a capital goods, because that's how a share works, right? It's like a claim on earnings from whatever capital good. Like, how do I square that unease, even if it does mean that, this is how I should save for the future, for me, for my family? How would you approach that person? Like, how would you sit them down and have a conversation with them?
Yeah, well, for starters, I would say, what's important to you, and like, what does money mean to you? And we would talk about it from that standpoint, I think. And for a lot of leftists, they think of companies as inherently bad. And frankly, I don't disagree with them. Companies under most countries' securities laws are obligated to maximize their returns. Most of the big ones. I mean, there's some cool innovations in that world, like B Corps or whatever. But like, we talk about what's the point of it. But I think a lot of it rests on thinking about what people can do personally and what impact they want to have. Because I think the work that people do in their communities or in their jobs will be much higher impact than how they invest. Like, our investments are very, very small, but we still want them to be aligned, and we want them to be something we feel good about. Because if people aren't able to square their head about it, around it, they end up feeling avoidant and guilty. And that can lead to all sorts of bad, like personally dysfunctional and financial planning dysfunctional outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
It leads to money just piling up in checking accounts. And everybody can agree that that doesn't necessarily make sense,
Mm-hmm.
and it can lead to bad future outcomes. Like from, if I were, well, I used to work for a labor union, but if somebody came to the union and said, hey, would you like it if we were able to build a community allied organization that would help align with your work? We'd say, great. We wouldn't say, did you previously invest in Coca-Cola stock? Because in a certain sense,
Mm-hmm.
money is power and it's the opportunity to make change. And if we opt out of developing and building resources, we significantly limit our ability to make change. And that's a real problem.
I think I absolutely agree. These are two things, because one brings me back to an interview I had before with Leo Samolati, and one of the things he said that's always like really stuck with me is the fact that all of these kind of places are just like arenas that we do unfortunately have to compete with capitalists in. So just kind of excluding yourself from the capital markets doesn't mean you really shield yourself from it, because you're still you're going to be a victim of the vagaries of capitalism when you're older if you don't have the kind of savings account or any kind of substantial saving lined up. So whether we like it or not, these are still kind of arenas where we do have to compete with traditional capitalists. If you do save up a substantial amount, this is also money that you can put towards the kind of left-leaning causes that you want to in the future. Like this is obviously money that can be used to affect positive change, which I think you're absolutely right, is magnitudes more important than just kind of abstaining from participating and owning any equities at all.
I think that's totally right. And let me just say, there's a danger if one accepts the view that we've been articulating, like, oh, we want to put together some resources and they'll grow and we'll use them now and in the future to make change in the world and to align with leftist organizing. And also we'll use them to like pay our mortgage, so we're housing secure and that kind of stuff. The problem is, over time, if you amass too much money and you don't have accountability, you can lose your way. I think of this as there's always cheese in mousetraps problem. Like the way the system works is the guy who, sets the mousetrap knows that it's more likely that ultimately he'll catch the mouse than the mouse will sustainably get away with the cheese. So I always say that to leftists who are thinking about going into finance. They're pretty sure that in the long run you're going to turn into a capitalist, and you can take the bet that you can get the cheese out of the mousetrap, but it's a risky bet. So I think it's really important if one adopts this strategy to create some accountability mechanisms. And we're human, so we're social. So one of the strongest accountability mechanisms are who we hang out with. And it's really important to keep being in conversation with and keep being grounded with other activists and other leftists and other people who are working for change. Because once you start hanging out with rich people, you all of a sudden think, rich capitalist things make sense. And it's very easy to accidentally have your worldview shift. And one morning you wake up and you've been slowly changing over time. And you think, oh, that was adorable when I used to, work for equitability and equality. So I think people have to be very careful about that challenge. But I'll say that money has this terrible characteristic that having it just often makes people want more of it. And they always think that if they have a little more, it'll be enough. It's like Doritos. Does this ever happen to you, Sid, that you like have some Doritos and you're like, oh man, that's really good. And then you think you just want one more Dorito and then you'll be done the Doritos. And when you have it, it just makes you want to have another one.
Yeah. Then I'm sitting in total shame at 3 a.m. in the morning, just watching the glow on my TV. That's happened to me.
And I feel a little sick.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It doesn't feel great. Well, I feel money can have sort of the same disastrous thing, that money just makes you feel like you need a little more. But the secret of it is money is never what makes somebody realize they have enough. The thing that makes somebody realize they have enough is community, it's friendships, it's being present, it's being aligned with values and realizing them in the world, it's being of service, it's making people's lives better, and it's stopping to notice and having a practice of cultivating gratitude and understanding what are the things in our life we're grateful for. And I'm grateful right now that I'm here with you, Sid, and that we're talking about these hard problems. And that's going to make us all a lot more gratified than if we had a little more money. This is what life is about. And the capitalist story that life is about more money, well, it turns out that that's where a lot of these midlife crises come from, because it's a very depressing way to live your life. You never feel like you have enough.
I totally agree. And I'm kind of glad this kind of veered into a more philosophical direction. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It is money at least is a proxy for the pursuit of things or whatever you choose to. And you believe that once you get to that thing, whatever money can get you, you'll be happy. And you've kind of tied your self-worth to this thing that you can obtain. But you're right, it's never really that. It's more like the values of, it could be like creativity, kindness, friendship, loyalty, that you can kind of imbue right into your daily lives through friendships and relationships within your community that are absolutely going to be more meaningful than money. So could you speak a little bit about maybe your own experience in this? Because we're talking about, people on the left might be scared that if they get into this, they kind of slowly veer away from what made them a leftist in the first place. How did you keep yourself kind of grounded and always point your metaphorical rudder towards the values that you always had as a leftist?
Yeah, look, I don't want to hold myself up and on a pedestal. I do my best, and I'm sure I succeed sometimes, and I fail other times. But I'll share some of the things that help me move towards more success. One of the most important things is that I spend a lot of time with local activists. I spend a lot more time with activists than I spend with financial managers and investment managers. And when I'm spending time with investment managers and financial planners, I try to spend time with ones that are concerned about the same big issues that I'm concerned with, that are concerned about climate change, that are concerned about racial inequality, that are concerned about injustice more broadly. So I try to surround myself with people who care about these things. And I also try to surround myself with a culture about this. I'll tell you a personal story about it, which is I grew up in a socialist Jewish youth movement that was modeled on the kibbutz movement. So I went to summer camp, and we would have work projects. Like one summer I had to shovel shit on the farm, and another summer I was cutting up vegetables, and another summer I was cleaning up the bathroom. That's not normal stuff that middle-class kids do at most American summer camps, but we did it at my camp. And it made a big impact on me. And when it was time to raise and lower the flags, we sung what are not other places conventional songs. And one of the songs we sung was called Banks of Marble. And it is straight up 1940s polemical music, and it talks about the verses are things like, I seen the weary farmer plowing sodden loam, I heard the auction hammer knocking down his home. And it's really intense stuff. And one night I realized that my son, who's almost 4, loves getting sung songs at night. So when I put him to bed, one time I just sung 10 or 12 different songs, and he really likes Banks Are Made of Marble. So we sing it almost every night. And I'm confronted with this question about what role do I play in this system where people work hard and are exploited for their work, and how do I feel about that? And I think, it's really afflicting. I have to think about that every day, and it's a really useful signpost. And I'm so appreciative and grateful to my 4-year-old son that he loves this song that forced me to confront the realness of exploitation of people's work every day. That's kind of a weird answer.
No, it's really moving.
Socialist songs to my kid, but
no, it's a meaningful answer. I think because to me, at least personally, one of the great tragedies of capitalism has been that it's kind of convinced a lot of people, especially in my generation, is that there's a thing you can buy, like a pill or a car or a house that will, finally make you happy or make you content. And it veers you away from what can really make you content and happy, which is accessible to you like every day when you wake up, which is being in touch with your values and moving towards the kind of future that you want to have, that's devoid of like things and pills or whatever, so you're right, as in it's all those things are they're right there, being able to chase your values. So um I think what we're saying is, like, the moral of the story is, as a leftist, you should see money as a means of end to kind of be able to survive when you're in your old age. But the way that you can do that without getting too caught up in this allure is to just continue doing things that actually made you leftist in the first place, right?
Yeah, wow. You said it much better than I said it. And I'm so appreciative of your bringing that wisdom to it. I think that's right. And I want to just build on the point about the tragedy of capitalism. And if you just buy one more pill or a different pill, I think it's right. I personally struggle with being addicted to my cell phone. And I realized one day that what's going on with the cell phone, what do they sell? Mine is made by Google. Like, they're in the ad business, and every app on there just about is trying to get me to spend more time on the app and look at more ads. And what does every ad try to do? It tries to convince me that there's a problem in my life, and the way to solve that problem is to buy the thing they're selling me. And I get exposed, I don't know, thousands of ads a day. And every ad is telling me that I'm not enough, I'm not worthy enough, and I have a problem, and they can help me solve the problem. And it's really hard to break that addiction. And the addiction leads us to feeling like we aren't enough and we don't have enough. And then the solutions never really solve the problem, because we're left with the problem that they convinced us we had. The thing is, their product didn't solve it. And I've just been in this long-standing thing of like, how do I break the grip that I now think to myself that a phone is just an insufficiency machine. All it does is try to convince me that I'm insufficient. And, I guess it's a pretty big jump from what we were talking about today. It's like, what's a leftist to do? But I think one thing that we should bring our leftist values to is just problematizing the consumerism that's all around us, and spending more time in trying to buffer ourselves from it a little bit.
No, I totally agree. I think in that similar vein, it's stealing the most important thing from you, which is like time.
Yeah.
This is time you can spend being present and aware of the present moment, of being mindful about what's actually going on in life. But instead, it's kind of sucking your attention towards this one thing. And maybe that's it's also maybe part and parcel because of the way that the human brain is wired. But yeah, you're absolutely right that cell phones do tend to do that. But I'm glad we're in this this kind of therapeutic, philosophical kind of conversation right now. But I totally forgot what we were talking about before this.
So let me tell you a story.
Sure, go ahead. Go right ahead.
And then you'll have a chance to remember where you wanted to lead us. But here's the story. It comes from John Bogle and one of his books. And he told the story of two authors who go to a very fancy Wall Street tycoon's party at his millions of dollar estate. And one author brings the other one to meet the guy whose estate it is. And he says, "What's your greatest work?" He says, "I don't think about it that way. I put all my heart and all my soul into everything that I write." And he said, no, but which thing sold the most? And he tells him. And the finance tycoon says, "I made that amount of money last Tuesday, and it wasn't even a very good day." And the author looks at him and he says, "Yeah, but I've got something you're never going to have. Enough. I have enough." And I think about that all the time. The goal isn't to have an amount of money. The goal is to have enough. And the goal is to have secure housing. And the goal is to have secure relationships with family and friends and to be food secure. But once you have secure housing and once your food secure, incremental additional money doesn't seem to help. And there's a lot of research about it. The research disagrees actually about where the indifference point starts. Some people say the indifference point is as low as $75,000 a year US. Some people think it's about as high as $200,000 a year US. But everybody agrees that at a pretty manageable level, more money doesn't actually equate with more subjective well-being. And that means there's significantly diminishing marginal utility to money. And there's a real benefit to getting to the point that you have secure housing and are food secure. And there's not a ton of benefit about getting vastly beyond it. And most people don't behave that way. And especially most professionals and most successful professionals really have completely failed to believe and live their life according to the thing that everybody agrees is so, that there's diminishing value to money.
I absolutely agree. And I think one of the other things we kind of have to grapple with, especially as you and I, we live in North America as leftists, with a very underwhelming welfare state, right? Because essentially, these are kind of functions that the state shall handle for us. Like, it exists to kind of provide that smoothing of consumption over everyone's lifespan. So this means having access to healthcare for no cost, having access to food security, having access to housing, having access to education. These are kind of functions the state should pick up. But unfortunately, we live in a kind of system that doesn't really do that. So one of the other things I do tell people who come to me, who are on the left and come to me for this kind of advice is, you're kind of taking into your own hands a function that your government, your state should be providing for you. And you shouldn't feel too bad about that, because that's just the way that things are. And maybe when you reframe it in that way, it also helps people feel a little bit less uneasy about participating in the stock market. I don't know about your experience on that, but do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think that's right, Sid. If I had my druthers, we would have an adequate national pension system. And it would have a system that would allow people to retire in dignity, and we would have a much more robust social safety net system, and we'd have much better unemployment insurance and state-sponsored sabbaticals when unemployment rates are too high. And we don't have that now. And so the question is, what do you do about it? And it seems to me what you do about it is you fight like hell to get those sorts of systems implemented. And you understand that just because the state isn't currently providing it doesn't mean it's not important. And so at the same time that we take collective public action, it's also prudent to take private action to make sure that that one's own needs are met. And those aren't necessarily at odds.
I totally agree. So I think, let's say, I'm a 22-year-old socialist who is just entering the kind of labor market, and I've got my working lifespan of 44 years left ahead of me. What is the kind of advice that you would give? Not specific advice, obviously, but what is the kind of financial advice that you would give to me?
Yeah, well, look, it's going to vary a little bit by country because, US and Canada and other countries all have different retirement plans. But I would say big picture, the first step is to try to do what you can do to eliminate high interest debt. Because a lot of young people, regardless of ideology, have credit card debt or other kinds of debt because people are preyed on by credit card companies. And so the first thing, I should say, before you even get to paying down debt, you have to figure out how to have your expenses be less than your income. Because when your income is greater than your expenses, you can be building a better financial footing. And when your expenses are bigger than your income, well, you're getting a little poorer every day in a way that is not long-term sustainable. And I should also say, it is harder for people who are 22 today than people who were 22 20 years ago or 40 years ago or 60 years ago, because healthcare is more expensive in most countries, because university is more expensive in most countries, because housing is unsustainably expensive in most countries. But 22-year-olds don't have control about it. I just think it's a major contextual factor that's important to say, because a lot of times parents and grandparents, are guilting people and saying, oh, I was able to do it. I just did this, this, and that. And that doesn't work anymore because the countries that we live in have gotten harder and harder and harder for young people. So I say that to just have a little humility and kindness for people who are in a more difficult economy. But the point is, regardless of how you get there, to become financially secure, you need to have more income than your expenses. And then the first thing I would recommend using it for is, in most cases, paying down debt and making a retirement contribution. In a lot of cases, employers, especially employers in unionized settings, have retirement plans where there's matching. And so you get an immediate return because, say, you get matched dollar for dollar up to 3% of your salary. That means, if you make $50,000, your first $1,500 that you put in gets matched with another $1,500. If I did the math right, that's an immediate 100% return. So even if you're paying a pretty stiff rate on your credit cards, it's still actually better to not miss out on the match. And so I would start there. Depending on in the United States, it's often a good idea early in people's career to contribute to a Roth IRA, which is a vehicle where you don't get a tax deduction immediately, but the money grows tax-free. And Sid, let me tell you a quick scenario. Let's say there's two people, and one person puts away $1,000 a year in savings from age 22 to 32. That's 10 years. And the other person doesn't start until they're 45 and puts away $1,000 from age 45 to age 65. And it gets a historically normal investment return. Who do you think ends up with more money? The first person put in $10,000 and the second person put in $20,000, but later in life?
Probably the second person with the compounding interest, right? Because you're saying a savings account versus just investing in the market.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I meant to say both people invest the money in both the 22-year-old and the 45-year-old both invest in I said it clumsily.
Probably the 22-year-old, right?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
because it's a lot less money, but money compounds greatly over time. That's part of how, that's the sort of, there's a lot of ideas about capitalism, but one of the core ideas, which turns out to be generally correct, is that you can use money to make more money without labor.
Exactly.
And that's how investment works.
This is not a point that I really want to skip over, because this is something that I've DM'd people about when they've come asking me for advice, and this is completely blown their mind, is the idea of compounding return. Can you give people a quick explanation about how
sure,
how it works and why it's really beneficial for you as an investor?
So on average, investments double about every 9 years or something like that. Sometimes it takes 2 years if things are going very well, although more typically it would take 5 or 6 years. Sometimes if you're unlucky, it could take 15 years, but on average, it takes about 9 years. And I'm going to just round that up to 10 years because people like to think in round crisp numbers. So if you invest $1,000 and it doubles every 10 years, Sid, will it double exactly every 10 years?
Of course not. At 8%. Yeah. I mean, 7-8%. If you're looking at average returns, it should.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But very generally, this will never happen exactly the way I'm describing. This is just I'm simplifying to the signal rather than the noise. But all right, so let's say you get a return so that your money doubles exactly every 10 years. So you put away $1,000, and in year 2, you would have $1,072 because the percentage that makes the math work is 7.2% annual return. So you would make $72 in the first year. But let's run it over the course of a working person's life. You said somebody's 22. Let's run it until they're 72. So that means when they're 32, it will double. At 42, it will have quadrupled. Let's see, that was 22, 42. At 52, 8x. At 62, 16x. And in the year that they turn 72, at 32x. And so that means the first year you only made $72, but by the last year, you're up to 32x, which is going from $1,000 to $32,000. And if you graph it, you see that it goes very steeply up. And so the last year, you make more money than the entire amount you put in to start.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a lot of work to put in that $1,000. But by the time you're retired, if you just wait and you wait another 10 years, your $32,000 turns into $64,000. So if you divide 10 years by the $32,000, that means every year you're making about $3,200 or something like that when you started it with just $1,000. And the only thing you did was wait. And that's like the enticing allure of investment. And it means that if you figure out how much money you need to retire, you need about a little more than half that amount of money 10 years before, and you need a little more than a quarter 20 years before, and you need an eighth 30 years before. And it's very, if you think, I need $1 million or $2 million to retire, it's very overwhelming to think about how do I get to $2 million. But it's pretty straightforward to think, in 10 years earlier, I need $1 million, or 20 years earlier, I need $500,000, or 30 years, $250,000, or 40 years, $125,000. And all of a sudden, $125,000 seems like something that a person really could save over a while.
Absolutely. No, I think, that's the beauty of compound return. So as a 22-year-old, we do, I'm 24, so close enough, but we do have a unique set of problems that we face. We're being priced out of the kind of urban centers that we want to live in as young people. That's where the jobs are. That's where the kind of culture is. That's where, the fun stuff is when you're in your 20s. But even keeping in mind that context, it is still important that you set aside a little bit of money because of the way that you just described how compounding return works. So I just did a quick spot number. So if you put $1,000 right now for 50 years at 7.2%, it's about $36,500 by the time you retire, which is nuts for doing nothing, basically just putting it into an account. You're buying a index fund that's getting a 7.2% return, which is very doable. So that's the magic of compound return. But I think one of the final things I do want to end off with too, because we're getting close to our time here, is we talked a little bit at the start. Okay, now let's compare the 22-year-old versus the 42-year-old. I also had people asking me who were in their late 30s and early 40s who are saying, hey, look, I missed out on a lot of this when I was young. I was doing whatever. And now I feel like I've missed the boat. What kind of answer would you give them? And I assume it's still going to be, do set aside money, but given that now your kind of life cycle looks different, you'd probably want to vary how your investment mix looks like.
No, I think that's right. Sometimes people come to me and say, hey, I know I'm supposed to have been doing this for a long time. I haven't. And I usually just say, that's okay. We're going to figure it out. The best day to start was when you're 22 or whatever. But for you, the best day is today. Because that's the, you can't go back in time. All you can do is work forward from where you are, and we'll find a way. And there's a couple ways to approach it. The later you start, the less you end up with, and that's just sort of how it works. You can have a higher savings rate. You can catch up some that way. And if you can drive your costs down of your life, that is doubly helpful, because it not only means you have more to save, but it also means that your lifestyle is less expensive, so you need less money overall. So it's doubly advantageous, but it's very hard to drive down the cost of your lifestyle. So what I usually recommend is a different approach, which is just try to hold the cost of your lifestyle even while your income goes up. Because over time in their professional lives, most people on an upward trajectory over time. So if you can just hold the expense line while the income line goes up, you get a bigger and bigger buffer. And that's awesome, because that means you'll have more to contribute to future needs and things like that. And that can be very powerful. And then also, like, make sure you vote for people who are going to strengthen the Social Security and national pension systems. Because,
Absolutely.
the more we do that, the more it doesn't just help you, but it also helps other people who had a late start or had a thing that makes it hard for them to work professionally. You shouldn't have to be a very prescient 22-year-old to enjoy a comfortable retirement. And if you're 22, the best thing to do is be a very clever, prescient 22-year-old who sets yourself ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And what you were saying is absolutely true. The way that, let's say, luckily, the way that lifetime income works in a capitalist system is it kind of, on average, peaks around like the late or mid to late 50s, and then you kind of see drop off towards retirement. So if you're in your late 30s, early 40s, you're right. If you hold that expense line straight while your income just kind of goes up, just as a factor of living in the capitalist system, you will end up putting more and more away. So that's absolutely true. Anyway, so this brings me to my last question, and this is something that we ask every guest that comes on the show, and I find it a particularly poignant question. But the gist of it is this. So basically, let's say you could kind of transmit one aspect of Zach Teutsch's thought, something that is very like structurally underpins your belief system, into the minds of every single American. What single kind of idea would you transmit?
Oh man, that is such an interesting question. What are the things that underpin how I think about the world? Well, today I've been thinking a lot. I mean, in this era, I've been thinking a lot about how tax justice is racial justice. And I was talking earlier in our conversation about the work I've been doing to help make sure we have more progressive tax system. And I think the reason that that's so important is because oftentimes people who have wealth have amassed wealth under a system of great racial difference. And we would be much better off if we were in a system where taxes lined up with the point I was making earlier about the diminishing value of money. And a lot of it comes back to, if we had more historically normal taxes, our societies would be much better off, and they would limit the agglomeration of power too. And that would mean that as people are more successful, they're contributing yet more on a percentage basis to society. And that would be great, because it would be a very helpful incentive for people to continue to be very successful. So I don't know if that's quite where you really, I mean, that's a weird thing for a financial
totally up to
advisor
interpretation.
to say.
I get a wide array of answers. So any answer is a good answer.
You got to find your enough, man. And
Exactly.
It's usually not because of more money.
Absolutely. I tell you, that's a very poignant note to end this episode of the interview on. I want to thank you again, Zach, for taking time out of your day to do this. It's always an absolute pleasure to be able to speak with you. And from the conversations that we've had before, I really do appreciate having you around and the kind of work that you do for people. And it, as someone who is in that kind of industry, who's kind of doing a master's program in finance, it's really reassuring to see someone who hasn't been kind of corrupted by the industry around them, because you and I both know how wildly right-wing and free marketeer that system can be. So I'm really glad to see someone like you doing what you do in the position that you are. So thanks to you for being you, and hope you keep being you.
So thank you so much for having me on the show. And if people want to be in touch, anybody who likes can email me at zach@valuesaddedfinancial.com. And I see it as part of my mission to help people find professionals who will get them and understand their values and be of service to them. So feel free, for anybody who's listening who wants to find somebody, reach out to me. And actually, I'm based in the United States, so I know more about the options in the United States. And I'm sure, Sid, if people are in Canada, can they reach out to you?
Absolutely, yeah. Go ahead. And you were lucky enough to point somebody from Canada who did want to reach out and ask these kind of questions. It was a really great experience to be able to do that. So if you're Canadian, feel free to reach out to me. You'll know where I am from the links in the video and in the Spotify. But once again, Zach, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to plug?
Well, I want to just say, we need that. I often joke that, well, you said earlier that that I identify as a socialist financial advisor, and it's true, I do. And I often joke that there are way more socialists who need a financial advisor than there are socialist financial advisors. There just are not very many people who share our values, but also are willing to be engaged in capital markets, because usually people who are socialists would never in a million years want to be a financial advisor. But so many leftists, inherited some money or started a thing that was more successful than they realized, and they have hard questions and they need help. So if anybody listening knows some really good leftist financial advisors, especially fee-only financial advisors, definitely let me know, because I'm always trying to build a list. And that's one of my current projects. So if you know people out there who would do well to work with leftist clients, let me know and I'll add them to the list.
Absolutely. And again, I can't keep harping on this, but just another final thing. If you're a leftist who is kind of antsy about reaching out, please do reach out. Zach and me have received tons of DMs, messages, him probably a lot more than I have, of people on the left, good-natured people like you and I who want to reach out and actually talk about, financial sustainability. I want you to know that there is no judgment. You are not a bad person for wanting to secure yourself some kind of security in your future. Please reach out. It's never a burden to hear from you. We want to hear from you.
Totally. And it really is important to our identity. Just think about it like this. When you're on an airplane, they always come and they say, put your own oxygen mask on first. So, there's no shame in putting on your oxygen mask, in a capitalist system. Let's fight for a better system. And please, please, please just put on your oxygen mask.
Absolutely.